Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to today's Living in Hackney Scrutiny Commission. Should advise, of course, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. So please, when you speak, can you keep your microphones on mute and to ensure that there's no audio feedback. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand to get my attention, and remember to switch on your microphone when you do speak. For those online, the chat function must not be used to have conversations with, other than to advise of any points of order, as all the chat is recorded. This is a formal meeting of Hackney Council, so again, it's useful to remember that the press can access the recorded document at any stage, also while the meeting's proceeding, so they have the right to do that. In terms of apologies, we've received apologies from Councillor George Gooch, Councillor Caroline Selman, Councillor Claire Joseph. We've also received apologies from lateness for Councillor Gunde Muren, and we've also got Councillor Ifra Samata joining us online. Moving on to agenda item 2, urgent items or in terms of the order of business. Are there any urgent items? Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. I would like to declare an interest in terms of agenda item 5, being somebody who resides in a home owned by a housing association. No others? Well, Councillor Gundemoran may need to do one, when he comes in later. So moving on to our first substantive item, agenda item 4, new council homes programme. The Commission is keen to hear about the progress made in delivering the Council's target of 1,000 new homes for social rent between 2022 and 2026. The Commission sees this discussion as timely, given that the existing programme is due to be completed by 2026, next year. It follows on from the discussion held on the 25th of March 2025 on the development of the new housing strategy, which raised questions around affordable housing delivery and the progress made by the Council in directly delivering social homes for rents. Affordable housing delivery was also identified as an issue of local concern for residents who responded to the Overview and Scrutiny Annual Work Programme survey. Attending from Hackney Council for this item, we have Councillor Guy Nicholson, Deputy Mayor and Cabinet Member for Housing Management and Regeneration. Suzanne Johnson, Director of Regeneration, Economy and Housing Delivery. Hello. Rachel, is it Bagnall? Trying to make it fancy. Okay, Bagnall. Thank you. Assistant Director of Housing Delivery and Regeneration. James Goddard, Assistant Director, Strategy Assurance and Private Rented Sector. Hello. Chris Carthy, Head of Housing Regeneration and Delivery, and Jane Haverman, Head of Housing Delivery North. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting. And I'd now like to invite Councillor Nicholson and officers to begin their presentation, which was submitted in advance of the meeting and included in the agenda papers. I don't know which way round that's going to happen. Councillor Nicholson first, okay, Deputy Mayor Nicholson.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. And I will keep this very, very brief and then hand over to Suzanne and Rachel just to kind of take us through very briefly the presentation before opening up for kind of questions and discussion after the presentation. But just to say that what one would just like to place on record is the extraordinary work that the housing regeneration team have been delivering over the course of, well, not just this current administration. It has been going on a little bit longer than that too. Where we're at today is an extraordinary feat when you put into that context since 2020 some of the extraordinary circumstances that have been basically working against new development in all senses of the word. So from pandemics through to rising prices, through to supply chain issues, through to market crashes, and the list goes on. But through all of this, the team have maintained a focus, they've maintained delivery, and have been maintaining a flow of grant coming into the borough to help deliver new homes and homes for the community of Hackney. With that, I'm going to stop and then hand over to both Suzanne and Rachel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to cover the first slide in the presentation and then hand over to Rachel, who will take us through the rest of the presentation. The first slide really just sets the context, some of which Deputy Mayor Nicholson just covered, in terms of the challenges and the position in terms of new housing delivery and issues affecting London, Hackney, and obviously much further afield, the whole country. But we know we're in a housing crisis. The demand for new homes and affordable housing across the UK and in London is felt by so many of our residents. As I said, not just a Hackney issue, it's something that we all work with and recognise. There's some statistics there on the kind of council housing's waiting list, the number of households in temporary accommodation. I'm sure these have been seen and shared and discussed in many forums other than this one, so I won't go into those in too much detail. But Hackney has had a long-term commitment to deliver new affordable homes in the borough, and we do that through a number of different means. And we're here today to talk about primarily our kind of direct delivery housing programme delivered by Rachel and her team. I've just put some additional kind of comments in there as well about the local plan. So the planning process is obviously a kind of key part of housing delivery, kind of enabling and leading kind of housing delivery in addition to the direct delivery programmes that the team deliver. So Hackney Local Plan sets the planning policy requirements for many things, including our affordable housing kind of targets, our tenure splits for new homes and housing mix for our new homes as well. And that Hackney Local Plan must also be in conformity with the London Plan, which sets borough housing targets, and those filter down into our local plan. You've already mentioned, Chair, about the new kind of housing strategy, which this Commission has been hearing about. So we'll have a new housing strategy due to go to Cabinet later this year. You know, there's a lot of evidence base that underpins that housing strategy, again, some of which we've discussed in this forum. And we know that we've got a need for all sorts of different housing in the borough. We've just kind of highlighted there the kind of strong needs for more family homes in the borough that we'll see more of in the housing strategy. And just back to the planning framework, the London Plan is currently under review. It's typical of all these kind of big planning documents. They need to be reviewed on a regular basis. So the London Plan early consultation was out a few months ago, a kind of direction of travel document, and Hackney's local plan will also start being reviewed later this year. Not surprising, in the London Plan, there's a huge uplift in the amount of housing numbers that are expected to be provided across London. So, I don't think, as I say, no one's surprised by that. The key thing is around how we deliver those, how we find the sites, and also, of course, making sure that the funding is there to deliver those new homes. And then just back to that kind of manifesto commitment, which we're here to discuss today, and link back to that long-held kind of Hackney aspiration and Hackney ability really to deliver on new affordable homes for the residents in the borough. Thank you.
There we are. I'm going to talk to start off with about some of the challenges that we've experienced in delivering new housing here at Hackney, which Deputy Mayor Nicholson alluded to in his intro. I don't want to paint a really bleak picture, but I think it's really important to set what we're doing in that context. And yeah, so my first slide is really setting out some of the key challenges we were experiencing and which a wider sector is experiencing. In fact, it's a national challenge. So first of all, I'm sure many of you are well aware of the sort of cost inflation that we've seen across everywhere in the UK, but in particular, construction cost inflation has been at a sort of unprecedented rate. Since 2021, the cost of building new homes has increased by at least a third. We're now looking at around £5,000 a square metre to build a new home. When I first started building homes at Hackney over a decade ago, we were looking at around £1,500 a square metre. So a huge increase in the cost in building new homes. And there are multiple reasons for that, which I won't go into, but really we're talking sort of combination of Brexit, COVID, wider, the war in Ukraine, many things contributing to that. Secondly, the sort of volatility in the property market. We're not in a when I first started, we were in a rising market. So the cross-subsidy model is stretched because outright sale, the increase in or forecast increase in property prices isn't keeping up with the cost of building. And also cost of borrowing and fluctuating interest rates, particularly in the mortgage market, has also impacted the property market and our programme. And then just homes are becoming increasingly complex to build, especially at scale. We're in a world of changing building regulations, particularly in relation to sustainability, overheating and cooling, and responding to that takes time and also adds cost. And then obviously post the Grenfell tragedy, there is huge changes currently underway to building safety regulations, hugely changing landscape. Particularly notable is the requirement for a second staircase in buildings over 18 metres, which has been a huge adjustment we've had to make in schemes that are in that category, adds delays and additional cost and requirement to redesign projects to respond to that. And then finally, a huge challenge is the requirement now to go to the building safety regulator for approval. And the timeframes for that at the moment, huge delays in getting approval from Gateway Stage 2. We're looking at, on average, 25 to 40 weeks, and sometimes delays approaching 18 months. And our first scheme that we've taken to the building safety regulator, we're still waiting for approval, and I think we're now counting maybe 9 months waiting for that approval. So that's added time and cost to projects. Next slide, please. So just to set, to give a rather sobering bar chart that was released by the GLA last year, which just also backs up what I've just said about how hard it is to build at the moment. And you'll see that this bar chart shows the number of affordable housing starts on site in London funded by the GLA year on year. And you'll see that the number drops off a cliff in 23, 24. And in fact, it still doesn't really pick up in 24, 25. Just to give you a sort of scale of that, so in 23, 24, only 2,358 affordable homes started in London, which is the lowest number on record. And then in 24, 25, 3,991 started, and that's compared to the peak of 25,000 starts in 22, 23. So that just gives you I guess the stark reality of where we are as a sector in terms of building new housing and the challenges that everybody's experiencing, primarily with viability and making schemes viable at the moment in the context in which I've just explained. But it's not all bad news. So in that context, we have continued to build, and we've done everything that we can to keep the momentum up in the house building programme. And keep building, and this has taken a huge amount of effort and sort of adaptability. So just to run through some of the successes in the delivery programmes. We've completed Tower Court in Stamford Hill and Chowdhury Walk and Torian Walk in Clapton, and that totals 155 homes. We're currently on site with around 600 homes across a number of schemes. That's Buckland and Wimborne in Hoxton, Colville 2C as part of the Colville Estate regeneration, and Marion Court, Nightingale Estate, and King's Crescent phases 3 and 4. And they're all on site being built as we speak. On top of that, we've worked really hard to bring in additional subsidy to help us to address viability challenges that have been caused by the cost inflation and other factors that I mentioned in the previous slide. And we've so far secured around £90 million of grant funding from the GLA and from the government to support the delivery of our new homes. And that has helped keep the momentum up and enabled us to carry on building. We've also got a number of schemes that are in the design and delivery stage, notably the New Homes programme, which Cabinet approved in 2022, which is the 400 homes across garage sites in the borough, 75% of which are social rent. And we've submitted 4 planning applications to date for those projects, and have another 2 planning applications imminently to be submitted this summer. So we've submitted planning applications for Weymouth Court, Morris Blitz, Fellows, and Nye Bevan. So that's 4 NHP projects that now are in the planning process. Further to that, we take a huge, we value good design and quality, and we've worked really hard to ensure that that's safeguarded throughout the process of trying to make schemes viable. And it's still a huge priority across the programmes. And recently, Chowdhury Walk, the scheme of 11 houses in Clapton, received the RIBA Neve Brown Award for Affordable Housing and was shortlisted for the Sterling Prize. And the Tower Court development recently won a Civic Trust Award, a special award for community engagement and impact, which we were particularly pleased to receive because it recognised the efforts we went to engage and work, co-design that scheme with the community. And then just to mention a couple of other successes which aren't part of my service, but just the 51 social rented homes on site at the moment at Britannia, due to complete spring 26, and also the leasehold buyback programme, where 48 homes have already completed out of the 90 target, and that programme is on track to deliver all of those 90 buybacks by April 26. So this table shows the sort of numbers as of now. So my service, Housing Regeneration and Delivery, are due to have 815 social rented homes in delivery. Britannia has 51 social rented homes in delivery, and their leasehold buyback programme is due to complete on 90 social rented homes, and that takes us up to 956 social rented homes out of the 1,000 target. I'm just going to touch on the governance and monitoring that we have in place across the programme. So we have Cabinet approval for the principles and the parameters of the housing delivery programmes, and there have been a number of updates to Cabinet. And then we go to CPIC to approve the procurement approach for each project. And in fact, we went to CPIC on Monday for approval for the business case and procurement strategy for the tranche 1 of the NHP programme, and received approval there. And then we have regular reporting on housing delivery through our internal governance process, which is well evolved after over a decade of delivering new housing, and that includes gateways, which involve all the relevant stakeholders, and we go to Capital Asset Steering Board as well on a regular basis. And it's definitely worth mentioning the level of extensive resident and community engagement that we undertake on all of our projects. That's a hugely important aspect of what we do and is central to all of the projects. And we've further evolved that approach as part of the New Homes programme, and have really worked hard to ensure that residents are engaged in the design of the new homes and the spaces that surround them. So I'm just going to bring some of this to life with a few case studies of current projects or recently completed projects. So the first one is Tower Court, which I've mentioned already, which is up in Stamford Hill. We completed this scheme in 2023, and it's delivered 132 new homes, and 36 of those are social rent and 16 are shared ownership. And of the 36 social rent homes, 18 of those are 4 to 5 bedroom family homes. So 4 to 5 bedroom social rent homes, which are particularly suitable for large families, and there's a huge issue of overcrowding in that part of the borough, and a large number of families on the waiting list for those social rented homes. As part of the development, there was extensive public realm works and new play spaces created in new shared courtyards, given that we knew that the development was going to have a large number of children due to the large number of family homes. So we've created some very currently well-used play spaces in those central courtyards. And the development also provides a new energy centre, and also incorporates a number of design features which enable the homes to be suitable for households from the Haredi community. So we work closely with those from the Haredi community and other communities to ensure that that housing was suitable for, and in fact found common ground on that. And this project recently won the NLA Overall Winner Award and the Civic Trust Award that I mentioned earlier. If we move on to the next slide, please. So this case study is a project that's currently on site. That's a recent photo of the site. You can see the hoarding at the bottom. And this is Buckland Court and Wimborne Street. So that photo is of Buckland Court. This housing is being built on former garage sites in the St John's estate and the Wenlock Barn estate. And both, Wimborne Street is due to complete autumn 25, and Buckland Street is due to complete spring 26. And across both sites, we're delivering 113 new homes, and 49 of those new homes will be social rent and 26 will be shared ownership. As with all of our schemes, there are landscape and public realm improvements involved, and the new buildings have been carefully designed to integrate well into the surrounding estates. What's interesting about this scheme is it was our first scheme that we used modern methods of construction. So you might not be able to tell from the photo, but these are built off site using a prefabricated panel system, which enabled us to build the scheme really quickly and with less disruption for residents, and it's sort of less noisy, less dusty, etc. So that was our first trial of that, and with big learning experience, but it did enable us to build that quickly and enabled us to save some costs in building as well. Next slide, please. And this final case study is one of the New Homes programme projects. So that's the New Homes programme that was approved by Cabinet in 22. And this is Morris Blitz Court in Stoke Newington. And we've just submitted the planning application for this scheme, and it's building on a disused housing office site next to Morris Blitz Court. This is 100% social rent, so this is 19 new homes for social rent. And we're targeting these homes meeting the passive house requirements, so very high energy performance. And this includes, again, like all of our schemes, improvements, wider improvements. So here we will have a new secure courtyard for new and existing residents, and newer play equipment, and generally new landscaping improvements, and improvements to bin stores. And provision of additional cycle parking. So there are wider benefits to existing residents as well as new homes. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk a little bit in my final slide about what's next. What's the next housing programme? Now we've got the estate regeneration programme, the housing supply programme, and the new homes programme up and running and in delivery. So work is underway to develop a future programme of housing delivery. We have a very good, strong foundation of in-house skills, capacity, expertise. I've just concluded a restructure of the service and have a very good, sort of well-resourced department with delivery expertise, and we've got design expertise, finance, sales and marketing. So we're in a good place in terms of our sort of infrastructure and capacity to deliver. We've also been doing this for over a decade now, so we've got that kind of experience and lessons learned that we build into the programme. And we've built a really good, productive relationship with funders like the GLA and Brown and OPE and MHCLG. So we're in a good place to access more grant. And there's good kind of opportunities coming out of the spending review, I'm sure you're all aware of, and the commitment from the government to the 1.5 million homes. So everything sort of feels aligned in that respect to being able to continue delivering at pace and at scale. I think the big challenge that we've got is land supply and the availability of sites to build on. So we've been working, the asset review team have been working to sift through, to continue the work that was done to identify the sites for the new homes programme, to review the remaining HRA sites available, but they're limited in number and small and relatively inefficient to develop, and won't necessarily allow us to deliver at scale. So the next sort of place to look for land needs to be looking at exploring general fund sites and potentially even looking at estate regeneration as an opportunity. So the sort of message is that we're sort of well set up to continue delivering. We just need to find the land and the sites. So I'm going to bring the presentation to a close now and take questions.
Thank you very much for that. One of our questions was going to be, where are you in terms of meeting the challenge? And quite clearly, despite it be a combination of buybacks as well as new builds, with the addition of the Hoxton development, I'm assuming we are hitting that 1,000 target by. You're looking at me. We will meet that 1,000 social homes for rent target by next May. Is that correct? The Hoxton development, 49 homes are being brought on stream, or is that just at the process, right at the beginning of the process at the moment?
That's one of the projects on site at the moment, but there are many on site as well as in delivery.
Okay.
So we're currently in 815 homes. So that slide number 6 shows that we're that the housing regeneration and delivery service has got 815 social rented homes in delivery right now. And then you add 51 social rented homes being delivered on Britannia, which is on site, and also the buyback scheme, which is on track to deliver a further 90 social rented homes. Right. And that comes to a total of 956, so just shy of the 1,000.
So in delivery, not delivered yet.
Not built, but in delivery.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of meeting that target, how likely are we to by the end of this administration?
The 1,000 won't all be built, but they're in delivery, so they're either being built or they're being tendered or they're in the design phase, but they're technically in delivery.
I would laugh. I'm so sorry. In delivery. Okay, Councillor Nicholson, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, Chair. I think what Rachel is just trying to kind of share is that much as everyone would love to have not only found the finance, designed it, brought residents along the journey, started construction, and not only started construction, but completed construction, that doesn't happen in 4 years, basically. But what does happen in 4 years is the bringing together of all of those various component parts to deliver 1,000 social rent homes. That delivery will unfold over the coming between the next 4-year cycle. So those homes will be being built. They're on site, and some of those homes, in addition to that, are with architects and with residents at the moment who are designing them. Some will be coming into the planning process itself to get planning permission. Then they will start on site. So everything, it's rather like a lot of kind of sort of meshed cogs that are all starting to turn and move. And some are further advanced than others. So what we're looking at here in Rachel's list on, I think, slide 6, wasn't it? Yeah, is a pretty impressive number. Will those homes be finished? Probably not, no. Will they be on site? Yes. And that is the important thing, that what we've got is building and boots on the ground. Hopefully that kind of helps. The manifesto commitment was not to have them built in 4 years, much as we would have loved it.
I think that, yeah, in terms of the language, it leaves one to feel bamboozled by it. Sorry, you wanted to...
Yeah, I just wanted to actually add, because obviously we're here to talk about the council's commitment and what it was going to do directly. But I guess the other thing that we're not including in any of our numbers tonight is all the other affordable homes that have been built across the borough, not by the council, but enabled, as I mentioned, through our planning process and through our planning decision making. So there's various schemes, obviously, that we've not kind of presented, and our planning colleagues will obviously have those figures. So if helpful following tonight, happy to kind of provide that, and our planning colleagues kind of track those figures as well. But I just thought it was worth mentioning that, because obviously a huge amount, and well, I don't know if I could say it's definitely a huge amount, but certainly additional amounts of affordable housing I know have been delivered in that period, either in delivery or complete through the kind of private, outside of the council's direct delivery mechanisms. Just thought it was worth mentioning that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, it was, really just essentially social housing, because that was part of obviously the organisational commitment. And I think most of us were, in looking at that, the data presented, we're anticipating this would mean, I know when we say delivered now, there's different perspectives as to what delivered means, but we're expecting, right, properties ready to move into. But thank you for your clarification. They're in the works, is what we're understanding now.
I think it's also worth saying that we've, all of our projects in all 3 programmes are being delivered. We've apart from one, we've dropped one. We've paused one scheme out of all of them. In the context, I might add, where lots of RPs, house builders, and other councils have just completely paused their delivery programmes. So we're still delivering. Some of the schemes are taking longer because of the viability challenges we've been experiencing, but they're all in, as I said, in delivery. So they're all happening. We're working on them.
Thank you. So just before moving on, it was just a quick one. As with regard to the 90 million from the GLA and government, is that something that was provided at the point this program was initially? No. So this is new money that's come on stream.
This is the last year we've secured that.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on to commission questions. Thank you. Councillor Galbraith, go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up, just to finish on the numbers. When do you anticipate them being completed then? So if we're going to have 800 and something starts by May 2026, when do you expect them all to be completed?
I mean, Rachel might want to add, but they've all got different. They're all various sites that make up the number. So they've all got various different kind of completion dates. And we do, that information is available. We've probably not got it all to kind of go through this evening, but I do appreciate there's a number of different sites that make up that figure. So yeah,
that would be really. I think that would be really good to have. And just as a net, because obviously they're regeneration ones. So does that take into account the loss of council homes? So is that a net increase? That 815, is that a net new homes? So, or is that less the ones that they're replacing?
Yep, okay.
Yeah. Conferring on that, yeah, it's a net increase. I was just double checking.
It's worth saying actually that there's a lot of new kind of infill and new build in the programme, so there's not a huge amount of estate regeneration in the programme, but yeah, in terms of the gross to net, it will be the net figure. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Tinaz?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just for clarification purposes, am I right to say that we are not able to meet the 1,000 new homes target by 2026, but there is sort of progress in, but we don't know sort of when it will be completed?
Yeah, that's so. In pure terms, we're not going to have built 1,000 homes by May 2026, but we will have. Well, at the moment, we're on track to have 956 social rented homes in delivery, as I said. So, in the process of being built, or either designed
Why can't we push the
or built.
40 odd units to be built to meet that? Okay. So, sorry, Chair. My question is just based on the sort of buyback of former council houses. So we've got 90 social rented homes. Can we just have a breakdown of how many of those are like sort of 3+ bedrooms, and do we know that information?
Thank you, Councillor. So the buyback programme effectively is buyback of council units. So we're buying what comes on the market. We are looking at around, this is only a roundish figure, about a third we want as family size units, which is 3 bedrooms plus of that 90. Doesn't mean we'll get them, because we've got to get what comes up. Yeah, but about a third of that unit, a third of that number is council 3-bed properties. More broadly, although we are aiming at council buybacks on our own estates, inevitably we will need to buy bigger units because the council doesn't have 5- and 6-bed units either. We'll probably have to buy those on the open market. So yeah, around about a third of the 90 will be family size 3-bed plus.
Okay. One last question. So it's across the sort of borough, the buyback of former council houses. Does that sort of take into consideration of the regeneration of like Covey Estate, for example? Does that figure include the one that you had to buy back from the leasehold?
No, this is separate to that. This is a different programme, so we get an additionality through that. But on that point, which may help, Councillor, is that we are targeting is the wrong word, but we are targeting leaseholders who want to sell to us. So in a sense, it's a bit random because it's where the sales are available, but this is in addition to regen buybacks.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on now it's been raised, the matter of 4- and 5-bedroom properties, which obviously we have a huge shortage of in our borough. As like most London boroughs, we're seeing families having to move out. So within the considerations, with the stuff that's currently in delivery or pre-delivery, what considerations are being made with regard to that? Because obviously there's desperate need. We've seen it happen in Tower Court, and it would be good for that kind of model to be kind of further provided across the borough as a whole, rather than this kind of focus on 1 or 2 bedrooms and our developers kind of trying to suggest they can't afford to extend to those kind of properties.
Yeah, we're absolutely building family housing in all of our schemes, and not just building 1-beds and 2-beds. Tower Court, we were building some of the really larger, the sort of 4- and 5-bed homes, but we're 3-bed homes certainly are included in across the board in what we build.
Go ahead, sorry, James.
Quick follow-up, Chair. We do also have what we might call extreme need for 6- and 7-bedroom properties. They are going to come through the buyback programme and the market programme, frankly. We can buy them quickly, we'll have to do that, and then we can work out a longer term how we do it. But they will come through the buyback programme, the big ones.
That's great. But it's just in terms of percentages, will we see that the percentage reflected in Tower Court reflected further afield? Because I think it would be remiss of us not to ensure that that is prioritised, kind of to ensure that the kind of our communities are able to remain communities.
Absolutely. We have, we certainly follow planning policy as well, obviously, which has a requirement for the number of family homes in each scheme as well. Chowdhury Walk, for example, was mostly family houses, which were all social rent. So that's an example of another scheme where we prioritise family housing.
Thank you. Anyone else got a question? Sorry, Councillor Garbett again.
Yeah, just to follow up on the local need. So it's just about how the mix of new social rented home supply meets our local need. Obviously, we're talking about family homes already, but I'm quite interested in homes for people, for disabled people, so accessible homes. And obviously there's a London plan target around 90% of them being accessible and adaptable and 10% being wheelchair accessible. So I'm interested to know if the homes coming on board meet that standard. And yeah, how you're kind of making sure they meet local need. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. We meet the London Plan standards as a minimum, and we work really hard with our architects to ensure that we design accessible places that are suitable for people, wheelchair users or people with disabilities. So yeah, that's enshrined in our briefs for architects.
The 10% and the 90% adaptable, because it's the 90% that normally
falls
away, and we've seen figures from London that
try and ensure that the homes are adaptable for, we do that is part of the brief for the particularly the new homes programme.
Great. And then I know the chair was picking up on this, is just I'm really interested in how those things get discussed during the viability process of these schemes coming on board, and what kind of capacity the council has to do that kind of pushback and negotiation with developers, and what support, if any, you get from the GLA in that process.
Sorry, do you mean which aspect?
The viability assessments, when developers are bringing forward proposals for the sites.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for the programme that Rachel delivers, that's an in-house programme. So we run the modelling ourselves. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the viability assessments that developers provide with their planning applications, that's fully kind of gone through by our planning team, kind of tested in terms of, the planners will review the viability information that the developers provide, and then obviously use that to make a decision or a recommendation on the planning application to planning committee.
Thanks.
I was just going to say that the programme that I'm responsible for, so the estate regen programme, housing supply programme, new homes programme, is mostly we are acting as the developer. Hackney Council is the developer, so we are sort of run the viability and lead on that, which is a real benefit.
We've just got Steve Webster online. He's the chair of the Residents and Tenants Committee across Hackney, which takes in organisations across Hackney. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, I'm the co-chair of the Resident Liaison Group, and the other co-chair, Sarah, is on the call as well. I've just got two quick questions for clarification. The first question is in relation to shared ownership. The rent part of the shared ownership, is that based on social rent or affordable rent?
The rent part, there's a percentage charged on the rent, which I can try and find, and I don't know off the top of my head, but it's not equivalent to social rent.
Right.
But I might have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you. On the presentation slide, Future Housing Programme, point 4. Regard an asset review process to identify sites and land to build new properties. The asset review process you talked about, that would include a number of things, including identifying council estates, which could be potentially regenerated, and create more housing that way. Will the asset review process also include identifying estates with very old properties with high maintenance costs with the view of demolishing those estates?
I mean, we're obviously working very closely with our colleagues in housing services on that kind of asset review process, and kind of stock condition surveys will be a key part of that. So they will look at the quality of existing accommodation, issues with existing kind of council housing estates. So yeah, it's definitely going to be part of that process. It's at a very, very early stage, I would say. But yeah, that's kind of key part of the process. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Oops. She didn't, okay. Councillor Ozen?
It's about the future plans. And what progress has been made in developing a future program of new homes for social rent? And what are the associated timescales? What are some of the emerging priorities for any future program, and what evidence gathering has taken place to inform them? That's my first question. Should I ask my second question at the same time?
Sorry, I couldn't catch the end of what you said.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the end?
Yeah. The last sentence was, what are some of the emerging priorities for any future program, and what evidence gathering has taken place to inform them?
Right.
So it's safe to say that we're at the very early stages of putting together a new programme, having got to a stage where the getting the approval of the new homes programme in 22 and then getting those projects on site. So now we have turned our attention to looking at what the next programme is going to consist of. It's still early days. We're, as I said, looking at what sites are available and working with the asset review team on a very sort of methodical review and sifting of both HRA sites, general fund sites, to inform that process. And there are other big questions like what type of housing would be delivered, and what the model is and how we fund it. So it's really early days, and the housing services are in the process of undertaking stock condition surveys, which will obviously feed into the process. But it is very much in the process of evidence gathering, looking at what the opportunities are, and starting to put together some proposals. But it's worth saying that putting together a new housing programme does take a couple of years. The new homes programme took a couple of years to get to a point where we had cabinet approval. So it's timely that process starts now.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor, in terms of evidence base, this council has the most robust housing evidence base it has ever had. You've seen my strategic housing market presentation here previously. We have detailed figures at granular level. So I can tell you, for example, how many learning disability homes we will need over the next 20 years to a number. It won't be exact, but it will be there or thereabout. What that doesn't mean, though, is that i.e. the housing strategy, can say to Rachel, right, go away and build me 46 learning disability homes for older people. That's the more complicated bit, where things can be placed, land availability, viability, and all of that. But the evidence base that you've got and that you'll see in December refined is about as good as it gets.
Follow up? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
My second question is, what are some of the key opportunities which may enable the council to deliver an ambitious future program of new homes for social rent, which truly reflects local housing needs? For example, policy and legislative changes, new funding opportunities, and relationships with the key partners.
Well, I think I've touched on this in my presentation, but I think the opportunities that we have, that we're in a relatively privileged position to have spent last decade building our own housing, one of the first councils to start building our own council housing on our own land. And we have the infrastructure, the expertise and the track record as a sort of foundation, which lots of other local authorities are starting at a much, a number of years behind us. We've also built this very strong relationship with the GLA and other funders, and have, potentially a good source of further subsidy. I think that those are two key things. I think, as I said, the big challenge is identifying the right sites, and finding land, and also making those difficult decisions about what type of housing we build, informed, as James said, by the evidence base that's been produced, and also by the housing strategy.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I think that was good. I think the key thing, actually, as Rachel mentioned, is land supply. So the team are, fully set up to deliver, have been delivering, have got an excellent track record. But Hackney's land supply for new homes is, is challenging. And I would kind of add to that I think that will mean that the council does have to look at other and new options, potentially, around looking at the land that some kind of other partners might own, other landowners, working collaboratively, doing things slightly differently, because we are going to get a large housing target through the London plan, that we will need to identify sites that we can build on. So it really is about kind of trawling all the various opportunities to deliver. And I think, that's what we're all here to do. We all want to maximise the delivery of affordable and social housing in the borough, and we're going to need to cast the net very wide in order to do that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm asking this one on behalf of Councillor Samatar. How's the council ensuring that new social rented housing supply is future-proof? This is kind of following on from Councillor Garbutt's, and resilient to future needs with regard to energy efficiency, but also construction. And I think one of the key concerns is accountability of our partners and those undertaking construction work for us, and ensuring within the processes that we have those long-term assurances that should something go wrong, maybe 5 years or 6 years later, we as an authority have means to kind of be either recompensed or be some kind of applicant, because the timescales are generally quite small. So it's about ensuring that effective processes are embedded in our contractual arrangements to ensure that in terms of construction, we have means to kind of obtain restitution from our partners, if that makes sense. So it's about, future-proofing in terms of that approach, because we've had some developments where they've had problems with lifts, and the response was potentially, they heat up in summer. And for me, that's a weak excuse in terms of a new build. And that somewhere along the lines, our contractors have to be held to account to something like that, as opposed to these occurrences happening after that agreement period has ended, and then it be left to us to kind of put things right when they're not of our making. So how will this be embedded into these kind of processes? Thank you.
Well, first off, as I said in my presentation, the sort of quality of the new homes that we're building is absolute priority for us, and that runs through everything that we do. So whether it's in the brief that we write for the architects, in the process of designing the homes, and in the way that we build them, and the way that we look after them after they're built, it's absolutely sort of fundamental to everything. And also kind of energy efficiency is a huge priority. As I mentioned, I mentioned one of the schemes in NHP schemes is going to achieve passive house standard, and a number of our schemes we're pushing that energy efficiency envelope to achieve passive house standards. Not all of them, it comes at a cost, so we're having to balance cost with that. But we're certainly exceeding planning requirements and building regulation requirements in a number of places, and so, and we always sort of work really hard to maximise the sort of energy efficiency of our schemes. I think in terms of the way that we ensure that buildings are well built and how we work with contractors, that's we've now we've developed. We've learned a lot of lessons from early schemes, and we've developed. We've become a much stronger client. So we hold our contract. We take a huge amount of care in choosing contractors through the procurement process. We require them to evidence. There's a huge. It's not just about cost. We don't just use the cheapest tender. We go through a lot of. We put a lot of work into ensuring that we get a contractor that's going to do a good job and build a quality scheme with a quality finish and make sure that our schemes will stand the test of time. And we really see the homes that we build as part of Hackney's sort of future housing stock and legacy. So it's very much important, hugely important. So we have, we work, so for example, I'm just trying to think of an example of how we manage those contractors, as well as choosing contractors really carefully. We also, we have a very good scope for employers agents that work with us, and we have clerk of works inspections during the build. We have a very I'd say heavy inspection schedule that probably surpasses a lot of other clients in terms of going on site, checking that the buildings are being built properly according to the plans, that there's no corners being cut, for example. And I don't know if my colleagues behind me have got anything you wanted to add on that. Warranty. Yeah, we also on many of the products that we use, say roofs, proprietary products or windows, we have warranties, usually 10-year warranties that that we can go after the contractor if there's an issue, if something breaks. So yeah, there's a huge amount of work in ensuring that not only are we designing high quality schemes, that we're also building them, that the contractors are building them, and that quality is actually realised in the building.
Thank you, Councillor Garbutt.
That's really insightful. Just in terms of the design phase, I know some councils have do that kind of co-production with disabled residents. I think it's over in Hammersmith and Fulham. They've got a disabled representative who is involved in that design bit, like you've just described. So I just wondered if we have anyone that does that in Hackney. And also, with that in mind, when the social homes are being designed, are they designed with people in mind, or are they designed kind of end person blind, if you know what I mean? For the people that are going to house them from the waiting list.
So I can answer the second question easily. So that so they're not designed, they're not allocated while they're during the design process. So they're designed as general needs social rent housing. So yeah, they're not for specific tenants. But on the disability front, I don't know. I don't think we do have anything. Yeah. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm just checking with my colleagues who are closer to it on the ground. So we don't have a disability champion per se, but it might be something we could look into. But we do have our in-house regeneration and strategic design team that do a lot of, who are hugely involved in the design process. And one of the things that they do is ensuring that we're, our homes are accessible to a range of different people, whether it's people with disabilities or other needs. So there's a huge amount of care that goes into that, but yeah, we don't have a specific disability champion.
Great, yeah, it's just that I knew about that role in Hammersmith and Fulham, which is just, it sounds really good. But yeah, that sounds interesting. Interesting. Thanks.
Just picking up from that, because of the variance in disability, obviously, was it last month we had a motion for council in which we expressed a commitment to supporting families with children with SEND in terms of housing provision. It's about understanding also how that would fit into this, given that the configuration, of properties need to be somewhat different from that currently provided. And I don't know whether this is something else that can be factored in terms of future proofing, because I mean, one of the fundamental things is that bigger properties or more properties with access to outdoor space, ground floor access space, obviously that's a kind of premium in our borough, but it's these kind of additional elements which I'm hoping there's scope to be factored into the discussions about people with disabilities as well.
Yeah, absolutely, we would welcome that.
So we're finishing up on this piece now. I don't know if anyone's got another question. I'm going to just do a quick one. I'm not a really fan of compare and contrast, but I'd just like to know whether 2,000 properties provided across London, was it over the past year or so?
23, 24.
23, 24. And so it's understanding us and measuring us against our neighbours, where we factor in the charts, as it were. Are we in the top 10 in terms of provision? I know you've expressed the circumstances with regard to the challenges. It would just be interesting to know where we sit in terms of provision.
My colleagues tell me we were third in 2023, 24 in terms of delivering social affordable housing. There you are.
Well done. Thank you very much. Don't know if anyone else has got any other questions before we close. Okay, Councillor Dennis, go on.
Thank you, Chair. Just one final question. Going back to the case study and the ones in relation to Buckland Court and Wimbledon Street, you've mentioned that well, it's been designed in a way where we use the prefabricated panels. Just wanted to find out, you know, I know it's new, you probably might not be able to answer, but just want to find out the use of the MMC, how's it impacting the construction sort of timeline and cost, and also would it be sort of a standard practice perhaps going forward when we building new properties?
Yeah, so that has been a huge learning curve for us, being our first scheme where we've used modern methods of construction like that. It definitely saved time on site, and it meant that residents were less disrupted by the build, which is a really positive thing. So less dust, less noise, especially when you're building on constrained sites in estates, which are very overlooked, you know, very close quarters. I think there were quite a lot of challenges, partly because it was new to us and also the main contractor, and also because it meant that we only had a big part of the build was just with one single subcontractor that was the subcontractor that was basically building the panels in a factory, which left us quite exposed in terms of sort of risk if there were delays or like challenges with cost increases. So, but that said, you know, the benefits were significant, and we've been really pleased with the quality of what's been delivered in terms of the quality of those panels. And we would definitely consider using sort of MMC in the future. What we wouldn't do is necessarily require it as part of the tender. It would be more about seeing, you know, on a project by project basis about whether it's suitable and whether because part of the reason, you know, one of the things we need to do is make sure that we don't limit the pool of contractors that can bid for our projects, because that obviously means that we're going to get less competitive bids. So we need to make sure that our schemes are kind of, you know, we're not constraining the contracting market too much. So, but we would definitely consider, and that solution, that MMC solution was proposed as part of the tendering process by the contractor that won the project. And enabled some cost savings and some time savings.
Okay, I think I'm going to close on that. Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed questions, and likewise all the responses and engagement. It was really good to kind of gain further insight into the work, the delivery, the work that's going on. I think it was good to hear a commitment to larger properties in particular. Likewise, considerations that will be made in respect of people with disabilities and potentially including young people with SEND as well. Likewise, buyback. Great, James. Naturally, there are more questions which arise as a result of today's session. So I do hope you'll be open to receiving those and responding, so we can give further consideration to those additional elements. But thank you for your time this evening. Been very, very helpful. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5, Housing Associations Compact Refresh. The Commission is clear to hear about the progress made in delivering the Hackney Council Housing Associations Compact 2023-26 and to provide early input into the areas, what areas should be reviewed and what might be added to the refresh compact. The Commission sees this discussion as timely, given that the compact is due to be refreshed later in the 2025-26 municipal year. This follows on from previous discussions where the Commission provided input into the development of the compact before it was originally adopted by Cabinet. Attending, we have Councillor Sem Moema, Deputy Cabinet Member for Private Rented Sector and Housing. James Goddard, Assistant Director of Strategy Assurance and Private Rented Sector. I'd like to welcome you, James, back to this meeting. I'd like to welcome Councillor Moema to this meeting. I'd also like to invite Councillor Moema and James to begin their presentation, which was submitted in advance of the meeting and included in the agenda papers. You've got probably about 15 minutes to do this.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies in advance that I'm not with you in person today. I've got a few personal matters that I may need to deal with today, so if I drop off, we have discussed that. But I just wanted to say, yeah, we've really welcomed the Commission's input into this iteration of the compact, and as you've said, the compact expires, as it were, in 2026, so there's an opportunity for us to look at how we might modify or update any future engagement and the way in which we do that with our housing association partners across the borough. James is going to take us through a brief presentation where there'll be opportunity for questions to talk about what has worked well and where there are areas potentially for improvement. I guess one of the things to reflect on, similar to Councillor Nicholson in his introduction, is that we cannot underestimate the impact of the changes in the external environment that have been beyond the control of the council and housing associations. So building and fire safety being a really, really key one, and the financial implications of that, Brexit and the cost of materials and so on, and obviously the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown and what that did for people that were at home effectively for the best part of 3 years and the implications of that. We have had some successes around our engagement with RPs around domestic abuse support, domestic violence support for survivors, and also they have a key role in our attempts to deal with our growing temporary accommodation situation in the borough. But I'll hand over to James, and then happy to take questions afterwards, as I'm sure James will be.
Thanks, Councillor Member. Thank you, Chair. I thought it would be just helpful, I know 15 minutes, just to do a bit of a recap on housing associations in Hackney, and then I'll take you through the compact itself. So as you can see, a bit of revision here. Hackney has around 120,000 homes in the borough. You've heard that from me on numerous occasions. It's about a third, privately rented, privately owned, and social rent, affordable rent, both council and housing association. To give you some context, a bit of comparison here. Council, we've got around 31,000 units, of which just over 9,000 are leasehold, right to buy, okay? The RPs though, the housing associations, of their 30,000, nearly all of them are rented. So if you are operating within a grammatical framework of affordable stroke social rent, the housing association stock is the largest in Hackney in terms of affordable rent. Okay, it's more expensive than social rent. In terms of the language that's used by government, that is now a large part of life in Hackney. These are just the basic figures. Next one, please, Craig. What's in the name? Housing associations, registered social landlords, RPs, all of that. These are often confused, one and the other. A housing association can be a housing association, but it might not be registered with the regulator of social housing. It can be regulated with the Charity Commission. So there's all these slight differences in nuances. We have a guess, how many housing associations do you think operate in Hackney? Have a guess. Both active and inactive. 50. Around 50, your first point, right? So of those 50, they range from active large ones down to arms house organisations. We've got 6 arms houses, so we have a full range. Yeah, some are charities, some are RPs, some even aren't that. Some are private companies that are called registered providers. So we have this mix here in this terminology. To keep things simple, we refer to our compact as a housing association compact, so that it sets the standards for all, rather than just say an RP or a charity. I can talk about this in the car park till the cows come home, so I won't go on there. They are different in terms of their governance to local authorities. Back in the day when I first started, local authorities had huge control and influence over local housing associations. Now we don't. We have virtually none. They are independent. They report through a different reporting line. They all different standards, etc., etc. Yes, the regulator of social housing is there, and yes, the ombudsman is there, but the way that they take routes through those is completely separate and different to a local authority. That has been a massive change in my time working in the sector, and I'll come on to that in a bit, in a moment. Next one, please, Craig. I've raced for these a little bit. Housing associations are, of course, you'll be aware of this, but to give you some sort of context, they are very different beasts. Some can be general, for example, Clarion. We have very many specialist RPs in the borough, Agudas Israel. Anchor, some deal with older people, some deal with certain parts of the community. They are vastly different in size. North London Muslim have fewer than 1,000 units. Clarion, as a housing association, got 120, it's 135 now. Clarion, for example, operate in over 100 local authority areas in the UK. So this gives you the size, 170 in fact, that's today's thing, I got that wrong as well, so there you go. Some do everything, development, management, commission, some don't do any of that basically, some won't even do management, they'll said they're managing out to another organisation, so it's a very complicated picture. Over the last few years, so the last 10 years or so, we've seen a lot of mergers of housing associations. So for example, Clarion were formed by the merger of Affinity and Circle 33. Family Mosaic and Peabody, famously, it was considered a takeover of Peabody by Family Mosaic, but it's now called Peabody. We also have the emergence of for-profit housing associations. I think I've got a slide on for-profit, so I won't say anything at this point, but I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Generally, these are characteristics of housing associations which are distinct from local authorities. Housing associations do not and cannot issue social tenancies. Their tenancies are assured and fixed term tenancies. That will all change when the Rent Reform Bill becomes an act. So that will be helpful. There will be an open-ended tenancy across the whole sector. They don't have a right to acquire. They don't have a right to buy, but there is, in circumstances, a right to acquire, i.e. if you're a tenant of a housing association, you may be able to buy your property. You won't get the discount that a local authority tenant can do, but it is still there. A lot of housing association activity has come through mergers and transfers in a way that doesn't occur with a local authority, particularly in Hackney. And their rent levels are affordable rent. That's what it's called. Now, I may be controversial here, but we can debate whether it's affordable, truly affordable, unaffordable, or what, but it's called affordable, and that is defined by the government as a legal product. There was a question from Steve earlier about what part of shared ownership do we base our rent. Now, we do base our rent on Hackney social rent. It's not as straightforward as that, though, because it's a new build social rent. It can hit levels akin or close to affordable rent. Affordable rent is generally more expensive than social rent in Hackney, as it is anywhere. But that is what they're allowed to do. By and large, affordable rent on average is about 30, 40, up to 50 quid a week more expensive than Hackney social rent, depending on the size of your property. Next one, please, Craig. These are the figures for the largest 10 housing associations of those 50 in Hackney by stock size. As you can see, Peabody are by way ahead in terms of the stock. Then Sanctuary, then Gateway, etc., etc. You get the drill here. Much of those figures are comprised, and they come from stock transfers about 20 years ago. So a lot of the stock was transferred from Hackney to Peabody. Pembury, Sanctuary, Kingsmead, all those sorts of things. Yes, they have done some development and some new build, but it is not anywhere near the stock size as a result of transfers. The smaller numbers, ironically, are slightly more weighted towards development and their own build than transfer. They are the top 10 by size. Those figures will change as we go through it. I knew I had a slide on for-profits. The reason we put that up there is because for-profits are becoming bigger and bigger across the housing sector, not just in terms of what they're doing, but in terms of their profile, their prominence, their ability to access cash, their development, etc. For-profit providers can be housing associations. They can be registered with the regulator and they can be called a housing association. But to give you a view, a sample of what for-profits look like, a for-profit, I should go back to basics here, for-profit housing associations operate on the basis they make a profit. Generally, it says what on the tin, generally speaking, they factor in a 5% profit to their activity, and that's a profit. Surplus profit, call it whatever you want, it is profit, okay? But the way that profit is used differs. You may have heard of Sage. Sage is it's called Sage Housing. It is not technically a housing association because it's not signed up to the regulator. But Sage Housing is funded through BlackRock. BlackRock being, I think, the galaxy's largest private asset and hedge fund. The profit that Sage make goes back to shareholders. Simple as. And they're open about that. Their quid pro quo is, we've got so much money, we'll invest in you, you'll get some social housing out of it, yeah, and we'll make a profit. That's kind of their operating thing. They do operate in some local authority areas of all political colour. Resi and Aviva are slightly different models. Both of those are for-profit organisations. But Aviva, for example, Resi in particular, they make a profit of 5%, and that 5% is used for pension funds, for teachers, social workers, etc. So they will have a social purpose element to their for-profit activity. I'm jumping ahead of myself here. In Hackney, I will come to it again in more detail in another slide. In Hackney, we have an approved housing association list. In order for you to work in Hackney, you have to be on that approved list or we don't support you. One of the lines on our approved list is that you must not be a for-profit organisation. So far, we have not let them into Hackney and we've not worked with them in Hackney. I would suggest, not that I'm saying anything, but as part of the review, we will have to look at that again. The simple reason being, there's some question of legality around that. Sage have, and other for-profits, have in the past mentioned that that could be legally a restriction on trade under UK law, but it's never gone to court because you don't want to take people to court, right? But there's something we might want to look at around whether we keep them out or let them in or what, or do we distinguish between social purpose for profit or profit for, yeah. So that's going to be part of our review. But at the moment, for-profit housing associations don't operate in Hackney. If you look at the development figures in the last 5 years in the housing association sector, it's now approaching 75% of new developments are coming from for-profit housing associations. It's a balanced argument in certain respects. I'm not recommending it one way or the other, but we'll have a look. Next one, please, Craig. Approved list. So I said so how we operate in Hackney, yes, we have an approved list. There are 15 criteria on that approved list. Things like you must have a local presence in the borough, you must not be etc. You must be registered, etc. You must meet all sorts of standards and all of that. So we have that approved list there and we regularly review that. Again, I propose when we review the compact, and we want to review that compact through scrutiny over the next sort of 6 months, we also review the approved list, and you help me out with that, but you can tell me about that in a minute, Chair, what you think of that idea, but I think that'll be useful. We also have a housing association forum. This thing is a bit of a pain. We do have a forum. Attendance at that forum is not always good, whether it's chaired by the council or whether it's chaired by housing associations. It's dropped off a cliff in recent years because housing associations have turned in on themselves because they are focusing on fire safety, they've stopped development, there's nothing to be gotten from a council anymore, it's hard to get them to turn up. I'll come back to that in a minute. Working with our partners is still a high priority. We have a large stock in this borough, so we maintain regular and good relationships with RPs. My team do that, I do that. We are regularly meeting with chief execs just to keep them going. Liaison is through the housing strategy team, but also through planning and through just general activity. Next one, please, Craig. As you can see there, we are working on very specific topics. So we do a lot of work with specialist supported housing providers like Anchor on the supply of temporary accommodation, particularly on adult social care. Although Anchor weren't in our top 10, back in the year 2000, I may have mentioned this before, Hackney Council took the decision to transfer all of its sheltered stock over to Anchor. So Anchor have a large portfolio of sheltered housing in this borough for older people. That's interesting. It's also a great issue for us because we don't have enough older people's accommodation and we transferred it all and I've got no control over that, nor do you. We'll come back to that. Where we do need to work and where we have been working hugely with housing associations recently, particularly since the fire on Pembury, but the fire at Zytle Way, is on their response to emergencies. That needs to improve in Hackney. So we're doing a lot of work with James Groom and the emergency team on how they do stuff and don't do stuff. And again, we are still seeking and cajoling and bullying them and threatening them to build more. The compact. So you know all this, but now we're down to the meat and two veg. It was approved in Cabinet 2023. It's 2023 until the end of 26 in terms of its timescale. It is a partnership document. The next bullet point is the real critical one. It isn't a contract and it isn't enforceable. It's totally reliant upon relationships. Technically, if we want to change anything in that compact, we also have to seek the approval of a housing association board. And if the board doesn't approve it, then it can't be changed. It's owned as much by them as it is by us. That is the way compacts work. So yes, they're unwieldy in that respect. The positivity is that they are true partnership documents. I'll come on to that when you inevitably ask me how it has and hasn't worked. In fact, I'm going to get onto that anyway. We have, interestingly, the areas where we have had the most, let's say, strongest outcomes and outputs of working. Councillor Member mentioned these in her initial statement. This is where we do have power to enforce nominations. That's how we get access to housing association properties. We can nominate from the council list. We have an agreed contractually enforceable domestic abuse pathway in Hackney. It's taken a lot of time to put that in place. It's in the compact, but in the reality is, if you didn't have a compact, we would still have these in place. The third area of working that again was really strong but is no longer relevant was the Mayor of Hackney Housing Challenge. That was where the council used its right to buy receipts to grant fund housing associations to new build homes. The reason we don't do that anymore is because we have sunk our right to buy receipts into our own programme, which you heard from Rachel earlier. Without those right to buy receipts, that 956 figure would be more challenging than it is. So we have taken a strategic decision to move our right to buy receipts from housing associations to the council. That was the third area where I had a lot of leverage and a lot of power over RPs. Next one, please, Craig. There's only two more, you'll be pleased to know. I pointed out it is not a contract. We do not have targets and KPIs in that contract. There's all sorts of reasons for this. RPs would never have agreed it anyway. Sometimes you're comparing apples and oranges. We use the example of repairs and disrepair and where we were with all of this. None of them agreed that. There may be another way. When we do the review, we're going to try and look at that in a different way. Different data is used. RPs, when they submit their data to MHCLG, none of it goes through the local authority. If we want to see, for example, a housing association's data on its complaints, on its repairs, we have to write to them and ask them for it. It's up to them whether they give it to us. Simple as that. And then it gets complicated because they capture data in different ways. And this is why I said at the beginning, if you're a housing association and you're operating under 170 local authorities, and we say we want the data to Hackney, the amount of times I've been told, can't do that, James, it'll take me 6 months, I've got to do postcode searches and all that. We get that all of the time. We kind of knew that anyway, but these are the unwieldy parts of the compact. This is not unique to Hackney. There are 3 local authorities in London, Hackney being one of them, that have compacts in place, Tower Hamlets and Waltham Forest the other. Each of those boroughs reports the same thing, in the difficulty in getting hold of data and doing these sorts of tables so we can do some comparisons. I will come on to that. Basic monitoring for that requires significant resources. We do not have a team, we do not have officers in the council that deal with housing associations. You may want to look at that. It's being done by policy officers, strategy officers in addition to their jobs. So that's been a real key issue for us. I'm not pulling punches, that's been difficult in how we're monitoring that. We do, however, put resources into those parts that they are obliged to deliver, i.e. nominations, domestic abuse and delivery. We are taking final bullet point, back one, Craig. So we are taking a specific review of nominations independently of my team. We've asked the audit team at the council to do an audit of housing association nominations just to make sure we're getting what we are supposed to be getting. That's happening over the next year. Final one, please, Craig. I think I've got two more. Just a summary here, it does cover the compact itself is a very detailed document. It covers the standards that we expect on a broad range of areas, not just housing, but safeguarding, how they're employing people. We expect money to be brought in locally, inclusive economy, good growth, all of that, sustainability. These are all big things in the compact that we expect once they've signed up to it, they can deliver it. Final slide, please, Craig. I think I'm final, aren't I? So we are proposing, it's about 2/3 of the way through that, we are proposing a review period over the next 6 months, 3 to 6 months. We do need to review that, and we will be taking a year zero approach. Has the compact worked, frankly? Can we improve it? Are there different ways of doing things and all of that? But we are expecting to do a very detailed look at all of this with our RP partners. I'm proposing that could be something Scrutiny can look at and help me, or I can bring it here at different times and, you know, for your critique or what have you. So that there is that there. As you can see, we proposed that review. When we started this, when the compact was put in place, 2023, since then the world has changed. The world has changed because of Grenfell, because of building safety review, acts and all of that. Housing associations in Hackney have virtually stopped building. They're not developing at the moment. They're focused upon, to varying degrees of success or not, sorting out their fire safety, looking at their external wall systems and all of that. That's where they are, no matter what we do or we try. So many of the other things like apprenticeships, employments, all that are slightly secondary. That's straightforward. I'm not pulling punches here. And my final point, if you were to ask me, in summary, Chair, what has worked well, I'd be saying what has worked well of the compact are the things that you might expect to work well. Yes, it has improved partnership relationships, particularly where we've got those chief executives to sign up to it. But then you'd expect that anyway. Where it hasn't worked well is on those sorts of more enforcement-y, standard-y repair things. Again, we knew that would be a challenge, but we haven't got that working, and we haven't had that working. And that part of it, and I'm not pulling punches, I'm being really straightforward and really honest, is the sort of thing I'd like to focus on during the review period. That's a summary.
Thank you, James. Does anyone have any questions before I put my forwards? Okay. Councillor Garbett and then Zara.
Thanks, Councillor Moema, and thanks, James. All very helpful. My opening question is just about the number of housing associations that are signed up and what you're doing to encourage those who aren't signed up. And I think maybe out of that 50 that you mentioned, I know you mentioned some weren't active, so maybe that's not a good total number. And then I'm really interested in some of the specifics. I know you and Councillor Moema both mentioned the domestic violence work, which sounds really productive, but I'm really interested in some of the other areas and whether there's been any kind of progress against things like the voids, and particularly I'm interested in voids, tenancy sustainment and waste were the bits that I'm quite interested from the compact, and just, yeah, if you had any reflections on successes or challenges.
Shall I take that second question and then you take the first one, James?
Yep.
So I think my overall reflection is that there are broad principles. There's a broad agreement in the principle of having a working kind of people pulling in the same direction and working together. And as we both said, the world has changed, and so when I first became elected way back in 2006, there are 68 housing associations that were active in Hackney. And, you know, some of that is a reflection of mergers and kind of a bit more of a distance. I think the points that you raised, though, where there might be more scope are the areas where housing associations interact with different parts of the council. So, for example, if a person were looking at waste management on council housing estates versus housing association estates, there will be some kind of formal agreement between the waste department, for example, and that housing association. So there should be no difference in service. Failing that, then there would be a slightly different charging regime for those tenants of that association, and that would be managed. So overall, in those circumstances that you described, there should be no massive perception of difference between housing association and the council, I think where we sometimes, and I think members as well, to be fair to them, and members of the public, if an issue happens, because you live in Hackney, your first response is to go to the council to fix the rubbish, for example. And so I think there are areas in which different parts of the council, they are working well, in short, but they are things which are second or third order in the compact, because they are things which are contractual rather than things where there is, as James has said, leverage. So when we're in a position to fund more schemes that associations were bringing forward, there was a lot more leverage around development. And so those meetings that we had around development were very well attended by the right level of staff member. I would say there's a difference in areas like temporary accommodation and domestic violence and domestic abuse, which tends to have a different, that's more of a supportive role in both the council and in housing association. So there is service delivery, but it is more about supporting tenants to live well. And in terms of tenancy sustainment, those are things which would be managed in-house. So again, we would need to ask formally those associations what their policies are, but they will all be very, very different mechanisms. And I guess where we hear of issues is where something bad happens. So the fact that, for example, and just to pick one because it's one where I think this is going well, Industrial Dwelling Society, I know that members in Shacklewell have worked really, really closely with that association to put in place a very bespoke approach to tenancy sustainment and support to the people that live on that relatively small estate. And that works for them, but it may not work for a larger association.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a bit of an addition, Councillor Garbett. So Councillor Mermet is absolutely right, and I'm not adding to that, but just giving an example per se. Sometimes it can depend upon the association, and sometimes it can even depend upon the personnel of that association, and that makes a difference. We had a very big housing association who is still in Hackney, for example, had a lot of money spent under a previous chief executive on stuff that wasn't even on the list in tech and offer, but supporting pride activities and stuff like that. Personnel changed, and that kind of fund went. We have, for example, a sales protocol. The sales protocol in Hackney is for RPs not to sell their stock. If they're going to sell it to the council first. Yeah. Some housing associations adhere to that religiously and they offer it to me first. Some don't. I talk to them and I ask them, why? I find out about this because local councillors and local residents are saying that housing association is selling this property. I found out about it that way. I then go back to the housing association. Why are you selling this? Why haven't you told me? There's a sales protocol. You've signed it. Yeah, sorry, James, we'll do it next time. And they don't. Yeah. So we've got some figures on all this stuff. But again, there's not necessarily a straightforward explanation about how this happens in the background. It depends almost sometimes. 26 signed up.
So I think they're really interesting examples. And I think it's just from my understanding, from those things you've described, they wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the compact. Like what difference does the compact make in those situations?
If I was giving you a really short, straightforward answer, Councillor Garvey, it's helped with the partnership type arrangements. Yeah. Where we haven't got it working is the more structure. Have you adhered to this standard?
Just to add to that, I think the benefits of the compact or memorandum of understanding or whatever we may wish to call it in future, should we go ahead with something like that, is, for example, even though there may not be kind of formal powers over much of what we do, the fact that there is some engagement and understanding of both of our positions, theirs corporately and us as a public authority, really helps to encourage that long-term investment. So, for example, I've had a series of meetings in the last year with James, but also with Mayor Woodley and a number of chief execs and directors, and that has been fed into by lots and lots of members around the concerns that members have. Now, it's really important that those housing associations that operate here, they understand what the pressures that we as members and officers are under from their residents, but also our residents, our constituents. And it gives us a bit of leverage to begin that conversation and to have some terms of engagement, I suppose.
Just to add on, but I think it's better that we have one in place than that we don't. In that it does set a bunch of standards, and council members' point there, Councillor Garbett, was we targeted the chief execs and the boards to get them to sign up to it, and that's really been the critical thing in getting some of this work off the ground. And I think that going forward, we should have something in place that does set the standards in our borough, what we want to see, and we go from the top of the organisations. Again, it's again the relationship with the chief exec and the thing itself.
Thank you. We've got Zara Shuvazi, co-chair of the Residents Liaison Group.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, James, for the presentation. I'm RLG co-chair. My question is, you mentioned about the service level agreement. Is there any clear written service level agreement between the council and the housing association? And if it is, how you measure it? Because you mentioned they gained a nomination from council. How they is there any process in place to monitor if they providing the right service to the residents who's they taking over? And also another question is about the nomination. Are they getting, as the housing association, normally they have their own housing list as well internally? Some of them they have. What percentage they have to take the nominee from the council, or is the all nominees goes from the council? This is my question.
Thank you. So I'll do it in reverse order, Zara. So in terms of nominations, if the housing association builds its own property totally itself and it has its own housing list, it can nominate to its own residents. That's kind of the easy thing. Generally speaking, housing associations use grant to build property, therefore they have to abide by the nominations agreement that exists in Hackney. The nominations agreement that exists in Hackney is the same nominations agreement that exists across 11 East London boroughs, which is very similar to a nominations agreement that exists across the whole of London. That's a key point, because what we don't want is 32 boroughs with 32 different nominations agreements. In summary, a housing association has to let 100% of first lets to the council, 75% thereafter. That's a general basic. I and my team often try and negotiate lets to the council in perpetuity, and sometimes we get that. But the baseline is 175 in terms of nominations. How do we monitor that? It's a good question. So again, it depends upon the time and the effort that both parties put into it. We ask regularly for quarterly monitoring points from the housing association themselves, and we can double check that on the data that they return to the government, the MHCLG, and make them work. Generally speaking, I'm okay with nominations in this borough. We by and large get what we want, but just to add a bit of spice to that mix, I've got internal audit to make sure that that is the case. There may be some nominations that have fallen through the net and we haven't quite picked them up. That's because people at both sides of the organisation have forgotten from something that was developed 20 years ago, you might not know. But generally speaking, we tend to get our nominations and they go over to Jennifer Winter's homelessness team. So that's the kind of nominations thing. In terms of services, contracts and SLAs don't exist between the local authority for how it provides services to its own tenants, which is why we have a compact in place to try and get some standards into everything, what we expect on a state from waste collection, repairs, complaints, etc., etc. We can't enforce it. Reason being is that they are independent organisations. They also, if you are a tenant of a housing association and you have a disrepair, you've got a leak, you have to report that leak to your landlord, i.e. the housing association. If you are not happy with what happens, you will then have to follow the housing association's complaints procedure. That's similar to the council in that most of them have a stage 1 and a stage 2 complaint. If you are not happy at the end of stage 2, you go to the ombudsman. That's how it works. Having said that, Me and my team get a lot of complaints, as you will, as councillors. You'll have horror stories like I get from housing association tenants that have suffered mainly disrepair, but other sorts of problems. Generally speaking, my team can intervene if they have legal grounds to do so, whereby we treat the housing association as a private landlord. But that bar, that legal threshold, is quite high. And the first thing a court or a lawyer will ask us is, has the tenant followed the procedure and the policy of his or her own landlord? And that can be a difficult thing that we have to explain that. We do intervene, we have intervened, and we do serve notices on housing associations. But generally speaking, a tenant has to go through its own process. And that's why we can't necessarily enforce things like service level agreements and contracts.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to have a quick one and then I'll bring Steve in afterwards. Mine's in respect of safeguarding. Obviously, as a local authority, we have safeguarding responsibilities and duties. But as we can't direct our housing associations to provide us with related data, it's about understanding what that looks like in terms of their actions, given that it's set out within the compact. I mean, for instance, in terms of the monitoring which we may potentially be able to undertake, I appreciate resources are quite tight, James, but analysis of referrals made to adult social care or children's services, or trying to understand the referral processes that housing associations undertake with regard to survivors of domestic abuse and violence, I think would be incredibly useful for us to kind of have as a means of being able to interpret the efficacy of these arrangements and the support that's being provided. Because there's a lot of support that's being offered to these housing associations. It's my hope that they're taking it on board and utilising it effectively. But without that kind of information, which we could have access to internally in terms of referrals, I think it makes it incredibly abstract. And I'd like to have kind of more tangible, a more kind of tangible understanding of these of what's going on and whether these things are working as they should and the commitments that have been made are being upheld.
Councillor, straightforwardly, we haven't got that to the level that we'd like it, straightforwardly. So again, it's slightly fragmented and it's slightly patchy. Where I've got good data is domestic abuse. Where I haven't got such good data is other areas of referrals. Yeah. Sometimes the council can be part of fault there, because it can go through adults or children's and I don't see it, they don't see it and everything else. So one of the areas of the compact absolutely for improvement is safeguarding. We feel that because we have a very useful domestic abuse pathway and process in place, we can build upon that out across the other groups. And we're already talking to our housing associations, adults and children, to bring that together, whether we have a compact or not. At this stage though, I can show you the figures outside of this, we can get them over to you. It's not where I would like it to be. All right, simple as that, and I'm not going to pull punches. Okay, we see some, we don't see others, and that's why we have a risk that people can fall through the net. Simple as that.
Just to add really quickly, Chair, I think one of the things that the committee might want to consider for a future compact is this started in a period where relationships were relatively straightforward and people had one or two counterparts at best in a housing association, whatever the function might be here at the council. My own view is that areas like domestic violence and safeguarding of vulnerable women and survivors of domestic abuse, that has worked because it involves a multi-agency partnership and it involves people who are specialists in their field who also happen to be employed by a housing association. They're not, for example, although a housing manager or a neighbourhood manager is specialist, it's a very different type of a specialism. And I think a lot of positive things have come out of, if I can say this, out of COVID, in terms of it being absolutely essential to get that care and that support to vulnerable people across communities, wherever they lived and whoever was their landlord. It was a real learning curve, I think, for us and for associations to work together, obviously within GDPR, to understand who was vulnerable and who was not. So I think in a future iteration, the committee might want to have a slightly more rounded view that the compact is is as much about relationships and the functions of the transactions between the council and the housing association. And where it's worked well is because there are lots of touch points across different teams. And there's also a third party. So in the case of domestic violence, it might be the Homerton, it might be a GP, it might be, will be the police, for example. And that just kind of brings people's focus. And temporary accommodation is another good example. A number of landlords will own a lot of stock that they can't rent for whatever reason, and we will place people there, much the same ways that we do in regen voids of our own. And I think a lot of that is around focusing on an issue that we are trying to find a solution to. So I think the compact, a future compact, needs to provide not just leverage, so financial leverage, but also it needs to be able to demonstrate what's in it for the housing association if we're also resolving a problem that we both have.
A final point on this, Chair, is broadly related. I get a lot of complaints around gang and antisocial behaviour activity. And that is a thing that we want to bring together. Sometimes we only hear about this when it happens, but it's about how we bring those component parts, police, RP, council, the different teams together into one and get some sign up for that as well. That way, in addition to what Council Member said, we at least got some data there.
Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, as Councillor Moemo, is about positive outcomes are where most of the touch points are, but in aspects such as that, it can take a while for that information to filter through to the authority. So yeah, thank you for that. Okay, we've got two questions. One was, I did say Steve Webster and then Councillor Samatar. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, James. James, I'm concerned that housing associations are not developing at the moment. Is the council concerned about that also? The second part of my question is, do you have any data available to illustrate the potential loss of properties because the housing associations are not developing but focusing on building safety, fire safety standards? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Steve. Housing associations not developing does absolutely, it upsets me at the very least. So we are working with housing associations in Hackney almost on a daily, sometimes basis, to try and get them to build homes to provide additional housing. We are working every day at this, Steve. At the moment, you will have heard from the likes of L&Q, from the likes of Peabody. They have almost stopped their programs in London. For some of the reasons Council Member mentioned earlier, they're focusing on keeping their own tenants safe and all the challenges that we have, the challenges that they have, against which we are working with them to help them in ways we can help, maybe through the planning process, maybe advice on how they can use their land a bit better, maybe they can add things to their stock. So yeah, it is of great concern to us, Steve, and we do talk to them. At the moment, we haven't got a straightforward answer to that across the piece. It will turn around again. There will be, I know this is jam in the future, I'm relatively familiar with that, but we put a lot of effort into that at the moment. But, it's difficult and it is a challenge. Where we have had success, funnily enough, as Council Member pointed out earlier on, it's the more medium and small scale housing associations that operate in Hackney that have basically built new stock over the last 3, 4, 5 years, over 250 units. It's coming from the likes of the Goudas, the likes of Industrial Dwelling, the likes of Isha. That's where our stocks come through. And we are, again, working very closely with those associations to help them. It may be 6 here, it may be 7 there, but when you add the 6, the 7s and the 8s up to social rent, it becomes a program. So that's really where a lot of our focus is being at the moment on that thing. Yes, and loss is a significant point, not just through fire safety and all that stuff, but through sales as well. We have the figures that we are aware of. I've got to be very careful there, because I'm not necessarily, as I said earlier on, sometimes a housing association will dispose of its stock and I will know about that. Sometimes it will dispose of its stock and I won't know about that. And it's entirely conceivable that because we've not heard from a local councillor or a local resident that there have been housing association sales in this borough that we don't know about, that is a loss to the social stock. We have a very clear statement in our compact and in our sales protocol that you will basically minimize any loss of your social rented stock in Hackney. Tell us what the reason is. We'll work with you to try and address that reason. We'll work with you to try and keep that stock in Hackney. We have all of these things in place before you even think about selling and getting rid of it. Yeah, so that has, as I say, in fairness to some housing associations, they do offer stuff to us. We haven't bought a lot of it, Steve, for the simple reason being the sort of stuff that we get offered by the housing association, nearly always, I only think of one case that wasn't this, it's nearly always leasehold. The council, by and large, does not want to be in a leasehold relationship with a housing association. We have all the problems of leasehold. Our tenants in there will have the problems of leasehold, getting repairs done and all of that. So we tend not to do that, but we will try and get them to sell to another housing association, worst case scenario, yeah? So that does go on. We do intervene there. Again, it's something we can look at in a new compact, a new thing. But that question is key, minimizing those losses. We do what we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Samatar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, James, as well, because I like presentations like this, especially when it's broken down and simplified without the jargon. And so thank you for that. You've kind of touched on this earlier, but I wanted to extend it a bit in terms of when the compact was first adopted. The council at that time committed to relaunching the Hackney Better Housing Partnership, and that was to function as a forum for engaging with the housing associations. I wanted to know firstly if this has happened, and if so, has it provided any clarity around roles and responsibilities and sufficiently more robust, transparent governance and oversight arrangements, etc.?
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Sanders. It's a really good question. So, in straightforward answer, first of all, to has it been relaunched? Since 2023, Councillor, it's been relaunched not once, not twice, but 3 times. We've had 3 relaunches since 2023. Back when we had the Better Homes Partnership, the way that the partnership looked was we had an overarching meeting that was called the Better Homes Partnership, and we had 2 sub-meetings. One was the development group, housing associations that build stuff, and one we called the management group. The management group dealt with day-to-day management issues that housing associations would find in Hackney. We found that once housing associations stopped developing and we stopped using our right to buy receipts, literally no one was coming to the development group. And without an offer there, we're not going to get them back. So our current version of the Housing Association Forum is literally one forum where we deal with both of those issues in the same place. What we have done to try to get our partners back in that space is we have got housing association partners, a chief executive of a housing association in Hackney to chair the meeting, to invite colleagues from housing associations themselves, and we'll help them support that. I have to report that also hasn't been entirely 100% successful. So our last relaunch that we tried in May, we had a lovely venue, you know, the pumping room down in Woodbury Down where you can see the lake behind you and everything. It was chaired by a famous and high profile local chief exec. Only 5 housing associations turned up. When we did a bit of follow-up and asked people why they weren't turning up, it came to the same stuff again. Got to focus on ourselves. We're looking at things like this and so on and so forth. What we plan to do as part of the compact is hold a housing association forum event to review the compact. What housing associations told us is that they'd like themed meetings as opposed to necessarily where we try and do 3 or 4 things. Where we've done this in the past, we have had good turnout dependent upon the theme. So for example, training them in emergency procedures, we had a good turnout. When we did a session on smoking cessation and we were handing out free vapes, we had good turnout. When we were dealing with how you deal with antisocial behaviour, we had good turnout. When we wanted to talk about disrepair, no one came. They all hid. Sorry for using strong language, but that's a fact. Again, it's something we have tried. We've tried virtually everything to get this thing to work. We've looked at what other boroughs do. We've looked at what everyone in London does. We are probably going to go back for a route where we do the review, do it with the chief execs, get them back in the space, ask them to operate it, ask them to move it around, take it on for a year so there's a bit of continuity, so we're just not rotating it randomly, and do it that way. Theme it possibly 3 times a year on big ticket items, get some councillors along to it as well, so that can be input from the political side of things. That's our approach, probably in autumn, after summer. Wish me luck.
Yeah, I think it is disappointing to see, I'm not saying a lack of commitment, but a lack of engagement in terms of those kind of sessions, given the number of properties they hold in our borough and the level of accountability, which is, go ahead, sorry.
I mean, what's interesting, Chair, is when Councillor Moema pointed out, we have very excellent meetings with the chief executives and senior staff who come up to the town hall, engage very well. You know, that works smoothly as clockwork. When we had a development programme, the Housing Association Forum was really well attended. You know, 20 organisations there, etc., etc. Sometimes when we do things like emergency responses, again, it's well attended. So there's something in there. It can be well attended and it can work well. I think we've just got to get that sweet point around what the agenda is and how we get them there. I'm confident we'll be able to get that back up and running again. I will have to relaunch it for the 4th time, but I will do that.
Good to know, thank you. Was there a question from the floor? No? Councillor Samatar?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just wanted to ask a quick follow-up on that. And if the relaunch happens again, James, please let us know what support you need. I would love to be involved in making sure this happens because it's really important. In terms of those meetings, I was wondering, is it just the housing association reps or are residents, councillors, etc., also invited in that conversation?
So thank you, Councillor. We will invite you. Thank you for the offer of help. We've invited both. We've invited both councillors, officers as well. We've done it, you know, we've tried everything, basically. We have council members chaired these, the mayor has chaired them. So we have tried it both ways. I think at the end of it, it comes down to having a meaningful agenda for all parties at the same time as having both heavyweight officer and political representation there.
I just wanted to add one thing, Councillor Samatar. I think should there be any moves towards, if you like, blending residents into that, it becomes a very, very different thing. It would become, understandably, more of a casework, very specific type of kind of, we've got this, you know, like the councillor surgery, but the equivalent, which is the focus and the purpose of them is slightly more, if you like, officer to officer, where people in whichever professional capacity can help resolve any ongoing issues, if you like, on behalf of members, but also members of the public. And I'll kind of go back to that example that I used of industrial dwellings in your ward, which was really a really welcome revelation that they have done both. But actually residents don't necessarily want to be kind of walking around or listening to the development director talking about, I don't know, heads of terms or how they might be working through a lot of detail around a particular scheme or funding or those sorts of things until there's basically something to show. And I think whoever you are, whether you're a housing association or a member of the public, especially kind of in a post-lockdown world where people work remotely and time is so much more precious, if there is, we need to make sure that there is something in it for anyone that we attend, that we invite and is there. And just bearing in mind, I think for us that those housing associations, they have, or they should have, resident engagement processes of their own. And it's not for the council to replace those or to substitute for that. So that would be my concern around council officer time in effectively facilitating what housing associations should be doing anyway.
Could I just, on that point, Chair, so I mean, again, it's a really key point from Councillor Moema. All members at this meeting and elsewhere will know, because you are getting queries from housing association tenants, then I get them. Yeah, we are planning at some point, hopefully, a number of, not, I don't know if we'll call them training sessions or drop-in sessions for members. So members of my team, we can organise some sessions for all members to drop into, to come along to. However, we've got to work this out yet, how we do that, on effectively how we deal with housing association complaints and queries. Because there are methods and ways of dealing with that. You know, for example, I recently had a complaint came in, as council member knows, where a tenant of a housing association had a disrepair, but they reported it to the council as opposed to the housing association. What do you do in those circumstances? There's a way of dealing with that. And again, the way we do that though is by keeping a bit of a, not a wall, but clear blue water between how residents of the housing association work and the forums in which we work. Otherwise, it just becomes a complete mess. So we'll be going through all of this. In the past, we have not had residents at those forums, but like with our private sector residents forum, we have had a housing association tenants resident meeting in the past. I don't necessarily recommend that. It's not in the compact. Something we can look at, but we do need a clear blue water between those two.
Unless there's any more questions, we're going to have to wind up this agenda item here. But what I would say, I mean, you can see that some elements of the compact are working and others are more opaque in respect of the tenants and residents' experience. And I think that's what's important to kind of be picked up on the documentation as it's in its next kind of iteration or as it evolves. There's some areas, you know, that the tenants themselves wouldn't necessarily be aware of the provisions that they should have as a result of being a house association being their landlord, and likewise in terms of the protections as well. And these are the particular elements which I think is important for them to kind of, you know, somehow being developed within this to ensure that there is also a commitment to ensure that rather than approaching the council, these tenants and residents know who within their own organisations they can have, and there's channels that are immediate, particularly when it comes to safeguarding and risk to person and self, that there's immediate channels that they have access to, as opposed to going through an online system, which is often off-putting for many people and will result in people approaching the council. I mean, even when it comes to alternative housing, I know from my own experience, people have been directed to the council as opposed to viable options being identified within the housing association. So I think it's important for, within these commitments, there's something that is, in terms of the information provided to tenants, there's a holistic approach to ensure that they have agency and empowered in terms of their lived experience as a tenant, which I think would be useful. And I don't know how you capture that within your new document, Councillor Moema, but it would be good to have something along those lines. But thank you. I know from today there's going to be kind of further discussions and potentially some arising questions and suggestions that will be formally put forward. And I hope you'll be open to responding to those, both you and James. But thank you for your time this evening. It's really appreciated.
Thank you for inviting me and for accommodating me attending in person. Sorry, remotely. I will be there in person next time.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on, agenda item 6, scrutiny reports, letters and responses, which are just for noting, but you'll see it's both the letter and the response in relation to the Hackney Carnival and the meeting that we held in relation to that, and resident sustainment and vulnerability. They should be towards the end of your agenda. I can't remember the pages, but they're there. If anyone, yeah, they are for noting, but if anyone has any arising issues as a result of what's contained in the responses, please indicate now. Okay, thank you. Well done. Okay, no arising questions. They've been noted then. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, agenda item 7 is the scrutiny actions tracker. Obviously, it's a rolling item which we look at, or well, we note every month, alongside including So it's been updated since the last meeting. No, it has not. The tracker has not been updated since the last meeting, but it will be updated and you'll be provided with a copy as soon as possible. Okay, agenda item 8, Living in Hackney Work Programme 2025-26. It's for commission members to agree the work programme shortlist as set out for this municipal year. And I'd like to begin by thanking commission members, cabinet members, officers, non-executive members and local residents for their suggestion for this year's work programme. Based on the suggestions, myself and the Vice Chair have developed this shortlist for consideration. Subject to comments this evening, the shortlist will be discussed with cabinet members, senior officers and other key stakeholders before the work programme is formally finalised. Included in the agenda papers to support our discussion is a shortlist and draft work programme, as well as the suggestions received from stakeholders and the public. As you can imagine, housing will feature prominently in the work programme. We've also given prominence to community safety in the shortlist while making sure that we can make the best use of time and be as effective as possible. Meetings will be themed by service areas where possible to help us keep focused and ensure all witnesses are able to attend. So that's meaning just grouping housing issues together in one meeting as opposed to dragging it across to another meeting. So we have everyone there at the same time. Please can I now invite commission members to make any comments on the shortlist and draft work programme as it's set out.
So thanks for this. So the shortlist, the document with the grid is the thing that you're going to then whittle down a little bit further to get into the slots in the work plan, right? Yeah, I think it's a really good list and picks up on the stuff that we were talking about last time. And I did really like the suggestion that we were having around having like the little update ones. I know you've just said about making sure that we group things together, but obviously we give people the opportunity to join online. But I think going back to those pieces of work that you've got at the end is really important. So we just really make sure that those things have been delivered. And then, yeah, our next meeting is quite soon, isn't it? I'm really keen to do the ombudsman stuff. And if we can include the voice of workers and the unions in that, I think that would be really rich. But I don't know if we're going to be able to do that for the 8th of September, because your papers are due at end of July, according to this. So that's quite soon.
I can come in terms of timescales for the Ombudsman action plan. So I know that that's going to Cabinet on the 21st of this month. So I would have thought that we'd want to give a little bit of time for them to start implementing that action plan before we look at it. So I'd probably suggest towards the back end of the year. Yeah.
Giving time for things to embed before being able to kind of scrutinise all those. There's little point because not enough would have happened. Yeah.
I think that makes sense, and I know that I've contacted you separately about a platform somewhere for the unions to be able to speak about what's happening within the service, whether that's done separately as another smaller session. Yeah.
I think it would be officer as opposed to them representing a union in terms of the representations that we'd take. Although there may be union representatives, they would be putting forward an officer perspective, which is something that's common in scrutiny commissions. So, if it comes to wages or employee rights, those are not things that could be considered within Living in Hackney. It is just the kind of operational elements as opposed to, anything else.
Yeah, I guess it's the changes to the service that's implemented as part of the action plan, I guess, is the element that I think they're interested
in. Any other queries or questions about the programme, the longest as set out? No? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 9, minutes of the last meeting. They are the draft minutes of the previous meeting held on the 9th of June are included within the agenda. for members to note and agree. Do members agree on the minutes?
Agree.
Oh. Thank you very much. Agenda item 10, any other business? Is there any other business? If there's no other business, I formally declare this meeting closed. Oh, Jan, you're looking at, sorry, Councillor Osland, you're looking at me as though you did have a piece of other business. No? Thank you very much. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.